right now. So I'm just now on. Okay, cool. So that's us, but where is everybody else? Wait, there's one. All right, there they come. There they come. All right, cool. Awesome. Thanks. Hey, everybody. So sorry for the mix up. My computer decided that it had a mind of its own. So I apologize in advance for the delay. We are excited today to have Terry Berger with us. He owns Nice Guys Buy Houses, and he has been a realtor for years, but he specializes right now in being an iBuyer. I mean, that's what he does, is he's an investor. So we wanted to bring him in today to talk about how to work with investors, how to understand investors. So we're excited. Terry, thanks for being here, and take it away.
Oh man, awesome. Okay. Everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm gonna try to share my screen with you guys. Give me 1 second here. Trying to share my iPad, so just give me a minute. Tried to test this earlier and it worked. Let's try this again.
You see how to do it, to share the screen at the bottom?
Yeah, I've got it. I just
There we go.
all right. Cool. All right, can you see it or no?
Not yet. You need to pick out, pick which one you're gonna, did you choose the
Yes, hearing. Okay, got it. Let's see.
type of screen and then hit share at the bottom?
There we go. I think we got it now. Boom.
There we go.
Okay. All right, great. Good notes. There we go. Okay. All right. Before we start, let's see how many people we got. 8 participants on the call. You guys can certainly unmute yourselves if you'd like. And if I can see your faces, that would be awesome too. I know it's with Zoom, it's hard to get feedback sometimes. So if you're in a spot that you can share your camera, that'd be great. But I'd like to know what you guys are hoping to get out of this. Every time I teach one of these classes, I want to know what the people in the class want to get out of it. So anybody want to kind of weigh in on some things?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it possible for agents to have good relationships with wholesalers or investors?
Okay. Great. That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else?
What are the options that buyers have, I mean sellers have, for if they don't want to put their house on the market traditionally?
Okay. Okay, great. That's a good one. What else?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm in the car. I'm not sure if I'm unmuted.
I sure can.
Oh, hey, Terry, this is Yvette. I'd like to understand a little bit more about, like, the return that investors are looking for, that calculation about, the cost, the renovation cost, and, the kind of the comps and what they think they can sell it for, and just kind of get a better idea of that.
Okay, great. That's always a favorite topic of mine. It's always more than you think. And I'll tell you why. Okay. Anything else? Investor calculations and returns? Anyone else? Real quick? All right, so I'll give you a couple more seconds here. And then I'll just go into it. So, all right, this is where I like to start. So I was an agent. I've been an agent since 2001. Got my license in February of '01, shortly after moving here from Ohio. My story is, I was a school teacher. I taught instrumental music. For those of you that are former teachers, or if anybody's a former teacher, I taught band and orchestra for almost 10 years. We moved to Atlanta. I took a big job over at Pine Mountain Middle School, and and we were building this big program, and I couldn't remember the kids' names. I had like 50 or 60 clarinet players, and I couldn't remember their names. And I was always this relational kind of guy. I'm like, I can't do this big factory that is Cobb County Band. I need to have a relational work. And I played with the idea of getting out and being an entrepreneur many times before we moved to Atlanta. And so my buyer's agent did a great job. And as most of you get into real estate, you're typically inspired maybe by a real estate agent. And so I jumped in and was a buyer's agent for a gal named Deborah Arendale out of RE/MAX. RE/MAX for 9 years, became one of the top agents in Cobb County, individual agents. And then created a team and did that for, let's see, from 2001 until 2015. I went through the recession. I think Julianne may be the only one on this call that's gone through the recession with me. And it was a trying time. It's interesting, this recession is nothing like the last recession, so enjoy it while you can. So one thing you learn going through recessions is you learn how to be a survivor, and you learn how to do what you really love to do. I love selling real estate. It was never fast enough for me. I sold 90 houses a year was the most I ever sold. Typically we were between 50 and 80 on an average year. And so, the claim to fame I ever had was, I think I was the top individual agent that did resale in Cobb County once or twice during that time frame with the Cobb Association of Realtors, and that was a cool honor. But at the end of the day, I wanted to invest in real estate, and I wanted to be home more. I missed my son's first soccer goal, and because I was out showing property, and that's my thing. Like, I own that. I did not want to be the guy that worked all nights, all weekends, and missed out on his kids. Today, Keller Williams teaches you how not to do that. But at the time, I didn't really understand that you couldn't. Does that make sense? So part of being part of Keller Williams, in my opinion, is Keller Williams thinks it's important for you to have a life as much as it is for you to have a business. I didn't understand that until too late in the game, and already made the transition over to an investor. But I like to differentiate between three types of people in the investment world, and agents are a big part of that. So over here on this left column, I have agent, and then I have a flipper in the middle, and then I have a buy and hold investor. And so Julianne's heard me talk about this many, many times. I like to start with the fundamentals every time I teach a class. And so we're going to talk about the fundamentals. And back when I started this class, you could, and you still might be able to pick up an extremely discounted fixer-upper for about $100,000. So what I'm going to do is, I've got three columns here. So if you're driving, I'm going to try to paint the picture for you as well. So, and in the column, I have the purchase price of a property is $100,000. Okay, all the way across. So the flipper pays 100, and I'm going to kind of preface this with a story. Okay, so you all are agents on this call. You have certain friends that you might know own rental property. Okay, so sorry about all the birds in the background. I'm out on our screen porch. Does it help? Might be a little soothing, I don't know. So let's say you go to church with someone who's a buy and hold investor, a buy and hold investor, and you come across this property going about your daily goings on in real estate. You're always going to come across deals. So as an agent, I always wanted to put my sign in front of pretty houses. I never wanted to put my sign in front of ugly houses, because ugly houses in my mind didn't sell, only pretty houses did. So, but this is an ugly house, and you stumbled across it somehow, and you're coming and going in real estate, and you're like, I really don't want to put this thing, a sign in front of it. I want to maybe be able to just kind of sell this. So you have a friend, we'll call him Bob. Bob buys property, and he's an investor, and you know him from church or wherever you know him from in your social network. And Bob, you call Bob because Bob's the only guy you know right now, okay? And you say, Bob, hey, I've got this property for $100,000, and I was wondering if you might be interested in buying it. Bob, being the savvy investor that he is, he goes out and he says, absolutely, let's go take a look at it. So you and Bob, you go out, you maybe grab lunch or whatever, talk about the house, you take him through it. And Bob's like, yeah, this is a pretty good deal for $100,000. So Bob writes a contract for $100,000 on that house, okay? Thanks to you. If you were a savvy agent and smart, you hopefully negotiated yourself a 3% commission in there. If you're really smart, you negotiated yourself a 6% commission with the seller. But no matter what happened, Bob bought it for $100,000, okay? So whether it was net to this, let's say you got 6% and the seller netted $94,000, Bob got it for $100,000. So we're gonna go with that $100,000 purchase price. Now, house needs a lot of work. Bob brings his contractors through, and it's determined that this house needs $50,000 worth of fix up to put it at what we call market value or after repair value. So agents say market value, which is the appropriate term, and investors say after repair value, which is the same. They are one and the same. Market value and after repair value are the exact same thing. It's just different jargon in different industries and how we talk about it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna fix this property up for $50,000. So renovation cost is $50,000. Now at the very beginning of this property, you pulled comps. So Bob bought this property for $100,000, but you thought that if it was renovated at top of market based on the comps, this house might be worth $200,000 to $225,000, right? So let's just split the difference, and we're going to say the ARV on this property was $215,000. So ARV, remember ARV is investor speak for after repair value, which is exactly the same as what agents call market value. Okay, so we're going to basically establish that if it's all fixed up, it's $215,000. Now, market value changes, doesn't it? If Bob didn't do anything to this property, his market value changes. If he puts $50,000 in it, his market value changes. If he only puts $20,000, it may not be worth $215,000. You guys understand that, right? Like when we're pulling market value and we see a top end comp, that top end comp is usually pretty nice. It's had new kitchens or whatever it happens to be in that particular market that you're studying. So, but if Bob decides to cheap out and keep it as a rental, he may not put $50,000 in. But for the sake of our discussions today, I'm not gonna walk you through the dance of all the nuance. I just kind of want to show you what the raw numbers are. Okay, what other costs? So if you're out there driving and you want to, and don't unmute yourself and put yourself in danger, but let's brainstorm some other costs that you might have associated with this property. What would those be? So you have your renovation budget, but what else might you have? Maybe some, go ahead.
And all those things that you have to buy. You have to pay taxes and all those utilities and all those insurances, right?
Yep. Great. Let's talk about taxes for a minute. If Bob paid cash, right, he has to pay a transfer tax. That's $1 per thousand. So his transfer taxes and stuff like that. So you've got prorated taxes and property taxes all in there. So let's assume that the taxes on this house, just for lack of a better, it's $2,000 a year. I'm going to call it. If the ARV is $215,000. It's not a stretch to go $2,400 because I want to be able to divide by 12 easily. So, or $200 a month is your taxes. Let's talk about insurance for a second. Insurance on a property that's vacant is usually about twice as expensive as it is on a property that's occupied. So on a house like this, we're probably paying somewhere between $1,800 a month or a year for insurance on a vacant house, maybe even $2,400. So again, I'm going to use the $2,400 figure just to keep around math. It's a little bit high, but it's not too far-fetched to be able to have the easy math while we're on the call. Okay, let's see, taxes, insurance. What about utilities, right? We need to have utilities. Utilities on a house like this, I like to budget, I call it the $50 rule. Or I'm sorry, $100 rule, 100 for gas, 100 for electric, 100 for water. It's never going to be more than that, but that's a good estimate, right? So $300 a month for utilities.
What about unknowns? Don't you have to put in a cushion for what you don't know once you start renovating?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So I kind of put the unknowns in that $50,000 renovation budget, but absolutely, you want to factor in at least a 10 to 15% buffer for something that might come up like mold or your HVAC craps out, because you didn't budget for it, all those kinds of things. So yeah, I got that in the renovation budget, but those are definitely things that you need to look out for.
Okay. So what about commissions?
Yep, commission. So the seller paid your commission on this one. So Bob bought it for $100,000 and the seller paid the commissions for you. So that was good. All right, so I'm going to move these costs. I'm just going to move them down a little bit, just kind of so I can write. All right, so now let's talk about what you made as an agent on this project, okay? So first of all, you sold it to Bob, and Bob hasn't determined what Bob's going to do with it yet. He's typically a buy and hold investor, so probably he's going to keep it and rent it. But Bob may flip it. He's done that before too, and you know that about Bob. And your relationship with Bob was like, can you show me, look, I'm going to send this to you, but Bob, can you show me kind of how you work? And I'm interested about being an investor. Can you show me? Well, yeah, Bob's going to show you, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you here on this call. So the agent made $6,000 or $3,000, right? So agent commissions, agent profit on this deal. It's pretty good. You had nothing into it. You made one phone call. And if you're savvy and got your 6%, you made $6,000. If you're savvy but not as savvy, you made $3,000. Now, as an agent, I always, agents are pretty nice people. They go into this and say, oh, you feel like you only deserve a 3% commission half the time. And I'm here to tell you that if you bring a deal to somebody and you're not representing necessarily the seller, you bring both parties to the table, you're entitled to a full fee, 6% of that. Now, what you decide to give away is up to you, right, to make the deal work. But at the end of the day, you need to protect your own profit and not be nice, okay? Because you're in this to make money, you're in this to be an agent, and you can still be nice and make $6,000. You just don't need to give away the money that you've earned to go feed your family, invest in your kids' college, and do the things that you need to do, right? I gave away probably, I don't know, Julianne, what do you think? In your career, I mean, I was super nice. Sometimes I would give discounts for double N listings and buy, and sometimes I had to, right? But
Yep.
I bet you I gave away $100,000 in my career conservatively because I felt like I needed to give somebody a deal even though they didn't expect a deal. That
Easily.
makes sense.
Yep.
So
Agree.
that's a whole different class, but let's just assume that you made $6,000 on this. So let's break down your 6,000. Again, I'm going to be really quick here so you can get to your questions, but $6,000, you're going to pay tax on that. But first you got to pay your towards your cap, right? So I don't know what your split on that, but Julianne, what would a split on 6,000 for a new agent be?
For a buyer's agent?
Yeah, or let's just say they got a $6,000 commission. What would KW?
Oh, it's 70. Well, when you take out commissions and, company dollar, it's 36% that you take out for company dollar and royalty.
Okay. All right. So that's before you cap. So let's just assume this is before you cap, guys. Okay. Because I want to work out the numbers that are realistic. So $6,000 times, you're going to keep 66% of that, or 64%. Let's just call it 30.
And then if they're coaching, there's another 5% that comes off.
Okay. All right. So that could be times 0.64.
For it to be realistic, yeah. And then the FMLS fees, of course.
Okay. So you're looking at, you get to keep 3840. Let's just assume it never hit the MLS and there's no MLS fees to pay. So your profit is 3840, and then you've got gas and time and all that stuff. So if you budget your time, let's say your time's worth $75 an hour and you spent 4 hours working on this deal. So your time, all that stuff's kind of included in here. And then you also have your normal business expenses, right? So I used to tell people when I would sell a house in 2 days, and that's commonplace today, I know, but they would look at me like I was crazy, like I didn't earn my commission because I sold their house in 2 days. And I would explain it to them this way: Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand, but my income isn't based on one house at a time. It's based on the 60 that I sell. Some of them sell in 2 days, some of them sell in 2 years, some of them sell in 2 months. And so your fee on each house is leveraged across the entire scope of your real estate work in a year. Don't ever forget that, okay? Some are easy, some are insanely hard, as you know, and the hard ones will make you appreciate the easy ones. So now you've got a 38.40 profit, and you're going to pay Uncle Sam about 25-30% of that. So let me calculate that number for you. 38.40, you're going to keep about 70%. So your total profit as the agent on this deal is approximately $2,700. Pre-cap, post-tax. Everybody understand? Okay. Now let me go over to Bob again. Bob decides he wants to flip this house. So Bob's going to sell this house for $215,000. And the cool thing is Bob said, hey, since you found this deal for me, will you list it? Absolutely, Bob. I'd love to list that house for $215,000. Okay. So Bob goes ahead and lists the property for $215,000. Now we got to figure out what Bob's going to make as a flipper. So Bob paid $100,000 for it. He renovated it for $50,000. Remember, we talked about that. And Bob held this property for 6 months. So he had $1,200 in taxes. Bob had $1,800 in utilities and utilities. And he had $1,200 in insurance. And then he's going to have an expense to you. He's going to pay a real estate commission of 6%, which on 215 is $12,300. Okay. That is most of Flipper Bob's expenses. Okay. So let's do the math on that. 215 minus 100,000 is what he paid for it, minus 50,000 minus 342, 4,200 in taxes, insurance, all that stuff, and then minus your fee equals a total profit to Bob at $48,500. Bob's going to have to pay taxes on that too. So let's go ahead and make his number 0.7% minus taxes. Bob's net after taxes is $33,950. Okay, let's talk about what you made. Now we could go in and you made 3% of that 6%, right? Your buyer's agent comes in like normal and you made 3%. So now your number, when you bought it, Bob paid you a commission or the seller paid a commission when you sold it to Bob of $2,700 net. And then you're going to get a $6,150 commission. So I'm going to multiply that out times the same number. This is pre-cap, 3690 minus taxes. You're going to net out another $2,583 after taxes. Okay, so that's all income you can put in your pocket, $2,583. So now between the two houses, selling it to Bob and helping Bob sell it as a renovated house, you've made $5,283 that goes directly into your bank account after pre-cap. So if you hit your cap, it'd be way more than that, and post-tax. Okay, so that's the worst you can do. The best you can do is if you've capped, right, you keep all of it, all of that commission that goes up significantly. But let's just assume I want to have realistic numbers here. You made $5,283. How much risk did you take in that deal? Did you take any risk whatsoever? No, zero risk, right? All the risk was on your friend Bob. So that's fine. You made $5,283 with zero risk. Not bad. You do that 12 times in a year, you net $60,000 a year. If you net 60, that's, remember, after taxes, after you pay the broker and everybody else, that's not so bad necessarily, okay? All right, but you gotta do that 12 times. Bob makes $33,950. He made almost seven times more than you flipping it, okay? Now, let's go over to Flipper or buy and hold Bob. So buy and hold Bob, we're gonna keep the math simple. So if you can see my screen, buy and hold Bob also puts $50,000 in renovating in it. He's smart. He wants to renovate it so that he can get the highest rent cost for it, right? If it's in East Cobb, let's say it's in Sprayberry School District. In Sprayberry School District, I mean, finding a house for 100 is really hard these days, but let's say you did. And now, so Bob's all in at 100,000 plus 50. Now it's taken him 3 months to renovate it. So I'm going to adjust the math. on the taxes and everything. So 3 months of taxes, $600, 3 months of insurance, $600, and 3 months of utilities at $900. So landlord Bob is now all in this property for $150, $1,200, $2,100, basically $152,100, okay? So I'm gonna write this in, all in, 152, let's just call it $152,000 even for easy math. Okay, so that's what Bob is in this property for as a buy and hold investor. Cool thing is, what do you think of property in Sprayberry? Let's just assume it's a 3-2. What's a 3-2 in Sprayberry rent for these days? A nice one.
1,800, easy.
Okay, great. $1,800. So rents for $1,800. And that's exactly what Bob decides to do. He's going to rent this for $1,800. All right, now, Bob has an asset that is worth, we said $215,000, but Bob now is all in this property for $152,000, right? So let me do that math for you. 215,000 minus, he was all in it for 152. Bob has an asset that he has $63,000 in gain on that project. Does that make sense? So Bob, on paper, decides to hold this property, but now he has a $63,000 equity in this project. Why? Why is it 63,000, do you think?
That, I'm sorry, I'm assuming that's based on what you could sell it for today after the renovation, correct?
Correct, yes. Yeah. So Bob, 215,000, but he hasn't sold it, right? So he can't realize this gain yet, right? He's got 63,000 on paper. But if Bob puts 15 of these together, Bob's a millionaire on paper, isn't he? Because he's got 15 assets worth $63,000 a piece. That puts him at, I think, within $5,000 of becoming a millionaire on paper. Now, let me talk about this for a second, because buy and hold Bob, not only has he got the $63,000 in asset, tax-free, by the way, there's no taxes to be paid on this right now. Would you all agree with that? There's no commissions. There's no nothing. So let me tell you what Bob does now. Bob.
Well, he's still gonna owe taxes on it.
He's gonna owe taxes on it at some point. At some point for sure. He doesn't owe taxes today because he hasn't done anything with it, right? He just has that $63,000 in equity sitting there, like you have $63,000 in your primary residence. So now someday Bob will pay taxes on this, but Bob doesn't have to pay taxes on this until the day he dies. He actually could kick this gain all the way down to the road until his death, all the way to his estate if he wanted to. Okay, so let's talk about what Bob has now. Bob has an asset that he's got $63,000 on paper. And we said it would take you 12 times to relegate that necessarily and realize that income, but he's going to rent it for $1,800 a month. Now, I'm going to pull out my mortgage calculator, and Bob's going to refi this house. So let me ask anybody on the call, whoever has done a cash out refi, do you pay taxes on the cash out that you pull? Yes or no on your home equity? Anybody know?
Say that again, Terry.
So I'm going to do a cash out refi on my house and take out $100,000. Do I pay taxes on that $100,000?
No.
Yes, you pay taxes on everything.
No. Yes. Okay. But what about, is that counted as income for my year?
Isn't that capital gains?
No.
When you do a cash out refinance, anybody ever do a cash out refinance on your house?
Nope.
Okay. Anyone else on the call ever do a cash out refi?
I haven't done one, but it's only a you're taking a loan on the house, so you're not paying any capital gains. You haven't sold the property.
That's correct. You don't pay taxes on it until you sell it. So what Bob's going to do now is Bob is going to go in and he is going to let me get my mortgage calculator here. He is going to, oh my God, it's too small. I can't see it. I'm gonna have to do a different calculator. Okay, Bob's gonna get a cash out refinance on this property, and he's gonna pull some money back out of it, okay? So, and his interest rate for an investor right now is about 5%. Let's call it 5%. It might be a little bit better than that. And he's gonna have to do a 75%, right, loan to value on it, because it's an investor property, but he paid cash for it. So I'm just running some calculations while you guys are sitting here. He paid cash for it, but he knows it's worth $215, and he's gonna do a 75% cash out refinance, which means he's gonna borrow $161,250 on this property. So let me punch that in, 250. At 5% for 30 years. And when I put in insurance and taxes, and let's just say there's a HOA, Bob is going to have a payment at $597.22. With taxes, insurance, monthly HOA, Bob's payment is now $600, okay? So let's talk about Bob's payment for a second. If his payment is $600, Julianne said that the property would rent for $1,800 on a nice house in Sprayberry. Bob's collecting mailbox money every month at $1,200. You guys see how I got there?
Yeah, so he's not just letting it sit there. He's got a loan on it to that he can maximize by buying other property.
Right. Now, if Bob spent, we already said Bob spent $152,000, right? He spent $152,000 fixing this house up, but he goes in and he did that 75% cash out refinance for $161,250. Forget loan officers and origination fees for a second. Let's just keep it simple because those costs are in there. But what's $161,250 minus his all in at $152? It's about $9,000, isn't it? Bob actually at closing gets a check for $9,000 that he gets to put in his bank account. And he has an infinite return for as long as he wants to have an infinite return. Okay? So what does that mean? Bob went in, bought this asset. He's all in at $152. On paper, it's worth, he's got equity at $63,000. Bob paid cash when he bought it. He funded he renovated it himself and did it all with his own cash. Then at the very end, he refinanced it out. He got $162,000 back, but he only spent $152. So Bob got a check to buy a rental property that produces $1,200 a month in income. Okay, now this is a unicorn property, I'm going to tell you. Now I have 4 or 5 of these unicorn properties that I have found over the years and that I will keep till probably the day I die and my kids will get them. Okay. Now I want to go back to what you guys made. You made $5,283. Bob, the landlord, can you get a good tenant for $1,800 first of all?
Yes, you can.
Get a white collar professional tenant, teacher, nurse, doctor, you can get anybody you want who has an incredible job at $1,800 a month. So because Bob did a huge first-class renovation on this thing, he spent all the money on the front end. He put new HVAC, new roof, new all this stuff, right? That house is like brand new to him. He's not going to have any issues with this house typically for many, many years, 3-4 years before the air conditioner starts to have a problem or something, right? So Bob's cash flow is pretty solid for a year, but as a landlord, you got to budget for some expenses, right? But Bob's gross cash flow every year is $14,400.
So even if he held on to it for only 5 years, that's $72,000.
72 plus the 63 he has on equity on paper. Bob makes $135,000 if he holds that property. What did you say, Julianne? 5 years? Yeah, 5 years.
5 years.
Right? The flipper made $34,000 and the agent made 52 and some change. Okay. Now let's just assume Bob does nothing and he holds it for a year. Bob's return on that property gross cash flow. Now it's gross cash flow because his taxes are different than your taxes because you're taxed on ordinary income. This is real estate rental income, and there's depreciation. There's all kinds of tax benefits in here, but I don't. That's too complex for this call. But we're going to focus on this. His gross cash flow is $14,400 a month. He basically almost 2.5 times you in income by buying this property that you as an agent should have bought.
$14,400 a year.
Yeah, a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what you should have, if you could have figured out a way to buy this property or partner with Bob, that you could be able to take advantage of. Okay. Now, let me go to your question. So everybody understand, the buy and hold investor always makes the most money. That's it. At the end of the day, if you buy rental property and you're a landlord, you make more than anybody else. The house flippers, the stuff on TV, they're never going to show a television show with a guy who owns 50 rental properties ever. It's not sexy television. The flipper who's running into mold and all this other stuff, that makes for good television. Or the Los Angeles real estate agents that have all kinds of drama, that makes for good television. But the buy and hold never makes good television, but that is where all the money is at. Okay, so now let me talk to you about, I'm going to take this funnel, we put a bunch of stuff on the top of this funnel, and let's talk about the options that you have as an agent. First question that was brought up, can agents have good relationships with investors and wholesalers? Right, that was the thing. And now why can't I share? Why won't it share?
Yeah, that was Stetson's question.
Let me make sure that, I think let me stop sharing and then reshare. All right, well, I'm just gonna go back to the questions and put you guys in gallery view here. All right, so agent relationships with investors and wholesalers. Let's talk, first of all, let's talk about what that means. A wholesaler, you all know if you don't know what a wholesaler is somebody who goes into a house, puts it under contract at a low price, and his sole intent or her sole intent is to sell the piece of paper, their contract. They're not selling a home, they're selling a piece of paper. That's what keeps the Georgia Real Estate Commission from coming down so hard on wholesalers. Wholesaling is illegal in some states, and in some states they're trying to make it illegal, right? Because it is kind of brokering real estate to some degree, but you're really not, the legality of it is you're brokering your piece of paper. So if you have a contract that says my contract is assignable and I'm allowed to go sell that property, that contract has currency in it, okay? So let's assume that the Georgia real estate contract has an assignable clause in it. And I think there's something in that. I haven't studied it for a long time, but there's something about assignability in that contract. And that property, if it has an assignable contract, that note or that contract has worth to another investor. So that's what a wholesaler is. They want to go and get it at a low price, and they want to call their investor network and say, do you want to buy my piece of paper for this much money on a certain date? And that's called a closing, just like it is. And at the closing, they not only get this piece of paper, but they get the rights to that house. They're buying the rights to buy that property, if that makes sense. When you as an agent go in and you sign a listing contract, you basically are controlling that piece of property to say no one come in and sell it unless they go through you, right? That has a value too, and that value is typically a real estate commission. So that contract that you sign with the seller has value in it, monetary value. But you could take that contract to me and say, Terry, will you buy this house, right, for a 6% commission? And if it's a great deal, of course I will, right? So then I'm going to write another contract, a purchase contract on that house that has value. So, but a wholesaler, I want everybody to be clear, a wholesaler is not a realtor, even though some of them might have a license. That's a whole different story. But a wholesaler is typically someone who has no intention to ever buy the property. They're using their network to sell it and assign the contract for a profit. It's called an assignment fee, okay?
So
Now,
what are the pluses and minuses about working with somebody like them?
So,
Because I get this question a lot.
yeah, so pluses and minuses to a wholesaler. You start to get into Georgia Real Estate Commission space when you're working a lot with wholesalers, in my opinion. As an investor, I hardly ever buy properties from wholesalers because the markup is so high that, oh, I'm sorry guys, there's a horn beeping. Do you hear that? Okay. The wholesalers are marking them up so high that they're not great for a small investor like me. But wholesalers will take it to a hedge fund contact, for example. They have lots of contacts with hedge funds, good wholesalers do. And so let's say there's a hedge fund buying 100 houses a month in Atlanta. They're depending on these wholesalers to bring them deals because that hedge fund person doesn't have the ability to go out. That's his network, right? Those wholesalers. So working with a wholesale investor, in my opinion, is something an agent necessarily shouldn't do. If you find a really good deal as an agent, you bring it to a real investor who's going to buy it and maybe partner with you on it. That's what you want to have happen. Anytime you find a really sweet deal, you need to partner with an investor if you cannot take it down yourself, okay? To learn, because you guys are in the wealth business. Like if you can create wealth through real estate for 10 years, if I could start over, I would start over buying the deals that I knew were deals instead of letting somebody else buy them. But I was foolish. I was selling 50 to 90 houses a year. I was making $200,000 a year. And I thought I was at the top of the food chain when I wasn't. It was the investor. Had I been an agent investor and come in and bought a bunch of those properties, I could be retired today if I wanted to be, okay? So let's talk about what the other types of investors are. You've got a house flipper, and we talked about that, Bob, in both capacities, right? A flipper and a buy and hold investor. And those are the guys that you want and gals that you want to develop relationships with, okay? Now, here's the dichotomy of being an agent, because we go to real estate school and we are taught to think about who? Who are we taught to think about? Certainly not us.
The client.
We're
The
taught to think about the client. Is there anything wrong if you walk into a property and you know it's worth $200,000 and that client says, I'd be willing to walk away from this property for $120,000. Is there anything wrong with you buying that house for yourself?
For $120,000? Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Why?
Because sometimes isn't it like unethical to not buy what it's worth when you're representing the client?
So there's the dichotomy, right? You just explained the dichotomy. We are trained and hardwired as realtors to care about the client before we care about anybody else. My aha went off when I walked into a listing appointment and this guy had this perfectly maintained house. It was the nicest house in the neighborhood, and it was right during the recession. And he said to me 3 times, I wish someone would just buy this from me. I would sell it if somebody would just buy it from me. I don't even need to get market value for it. Dichotomy of the agent in me was like, at the time I wanted to invest in real estate and I was looking for a good deal, but the dichotomy in my mind was I needed to get this guy the most money. Is that what he wanted? No, he was building a house in North Carolina to be closer to his grandkids and his kids. And that house was almost done. It was weighing on him mentally and he wanted to be done. The house to him had a purpose. It was called usefulness. It was not his piggy bank. It was not his retirement. It was not his only source of equity. It was usefulness for him. And he sold that house to me at $30,000 below market value because I made it easy. So I walked in wanting to get him the most money, and he said it 3 times in that call, and the light bulb finally went off. I'm looking for a rental property. I said, sir, would you mind if I bought this property from you? I can't pay you market value for it, but would you mind if I crunched the numbers and made you an offer? So I made him an offer at $30,000 below market value, and he took it. And we rented that house for 2 years. It was over by Kennesaw State. I wish I still had it, but I bought it with a partner who had some, I wasn't so sure about, I wanted to be in partnership with. So we ended up selling it and each made a little bit of money on that house. It is not a problem for Yvette to go buy that property for $120,000, knowing it's worth $200,000 if the seller says that's what they want. And you approach it in the right way. So if you said to the seller, Mr. Seller, I want you to understand something. I'm an agent. You called me in here to tell you what your house is worth. Do you know what your house is worth? And if he says, yeah, I think it's worth about $200,000, but I'm happy to, I know it needs some fix up and all that stuff. I need to move tomorrow. I'd like to take $120,000 for it. There's nothing wrong with you saying, I would like to buy this as an agent principal, and I'm going to be an investor, and I'm going to disclose in the contract that I'm buying this as an agent, as an investment, and I am planning to profit from this transaction. As long as everybody knows the story. Now, if you go in there and you do a whole listing presentation and you do this whole thing and you sign a buyer brokerage or a selling listing contract with this guy, that gets a little dicier. You have to figure out how to rewind all of that kind of stuff. But certainly, Yvette knows me. If I go in and Yvette says, listen, Mr. Seller, if you want $125,000, I can pick up the phone right now and get you $120,000. Is that what you want? Yvette calls me because I'm her favorite investor in her phone, right? She calls me and says, Terry, I've got this property for $120,000. What can we do on this? And I say, well, gosh, Yvette, it looks like a pretty good deal. Can we walk through it? And I run the analysis and I do what the example that I showed you earlier. And I run through the math and it works perfectly for a flip for us, right? And I'm like, great, we'll give him what he wants. We'll close when he wants and make it super easy. Isn't that what the iBuyer is doing? Like the iBuyer has figured out how to systemize this and make it big. But investors have been doing this for 50, 60, 70 years with people, right? The reason the iBuyers even came along is because they just didn't think about doing this for themselves. So what you guys need to do when you go in, you can certainly tell a seller, like if you just want a 3% real estate commission, you try to convince that seller to take a listing, but is that really what's best for the seller? Like your whole goal is to go in and see what's best for that client. And we're pre-programmed to think that it has to do with money. It doesn't. It has to do with sometimes convenience, or the house could be a complete disaster, right? It could be rodent infested. It could be, it could have structural damage. Like there's no buyer on the open market that's going to buy. That could be a hoarder house. Like they could be mentally incapacitated. There's all kinds of reasons that you can go in and act as the person, the savior, the Superman, and put your Superman shirt on and your cape and go in and save the day. And it doesn't have to be related to money every single time. And that's why We Buy Houses exists. Like, I'll give you a quick example. I went into a house that was rat infested, had 3 or 4 kids in there. They were sleeping with rats on the ground. They had mattresses, but there was so much trash from food trash they brought up into their rooms that the rats were everywhere. They're literally living with the kids. It would have taken me 6 months, 9 months to get those kids out of there with child services. But because I was able to go in and buy that house and the guy wanted to get out of there fast, I was able to give him a price that was worth him walking away, and I got those kids out of that house. Now that's something no realtor could have done unless they called an investor to do it, right? You have to have the solution for that person. Now, you've got people that are tied up in the money. They want top dollar. That's where you step in as a listing agent. There's not much else you can do. But the people that don't need top dollar, they just need some other thing to happen, they will trade equity for convenience, just like you do at CarMax, by the way. If you go in, if Rosina or Stetson goes in and they say, I want to trade, they want to sell their car to CarMax, they're going to leave a little piece of equity in there for CarMax, who's the investor, to buy that car, and you get to walk away. And you can be that for your sellers.
Terry, there's somebody who's asked a really valuable question, and that is, how do we search for investment properties? How do we find them?
That's a great question. So Keller Williams teaches door knocking, right? So here's how we do it. If I'm driving in an East Cobb neighborhood and I see a house that just burned down, or I see a property that's overgrown, I'm gonna research that. I'm gonna see I'm gonna look them up on white pages or wherever else I can find them, skip trace them, find them and call them, right? That's an example of knocking on a door. Other thing is, there's some savvy agents in our office that will see that ugly house, and they will go and they'll knock on the neighbor's door and ask what's going on. And the neighbors are a wealth of information for you, right? And then you call and you see if that person wants to sell the property, and you could say, hey, look, I have an investor that wants to buy, or you might want to buy it yourself. And that's how you do it. It's called driving, in the investor space, it's called driving for dollars. but you guys do it all the time. You drive for listings, right? Or door knocking. Door knocking is a great way. Okay. Now, just because it's overgrown and ugly doesn't mean they don't want to sell and leave some equity on the table. We bought houses from, one time I bought a house from 2 attorneys. They hated agents. A lot of times they hate you. Why do they hate you? They had a bad experience with an agent, and nobody's ever going to change their mind. They're that type of person, right? They had a bad experience one time. No one's ever going to change their mind. Those people are great, because if you run into them on a listing appointment and they say, I hate agents, I never want to deal with agent, I'm going to list it myself, or these FSBOs that you call, like let's say you're on the phone dialing FSBOs, you could say, look, I'm not calling to list your house. I have an investor that wants it. Would you consider this price? Right? And then you call your favorite investor, hopefully it's me, and you say, hey, I've got a deal. This FSBO looks like he's got some equity. Would you be willing to buy it? Absolutely be willing to buy it. Nidra, I'd buy it. I'd get you a 3% commission because I'm a shrewd negotiator. And then, by the way, if I flip it, I'm going to pay you a 6% commission on the back end when I flip it. Or if I keep it as a buy and hold investor, maybe we can work out some sort of other arrangement. Maybe you get 25% of the rents in perpetuity, whatever, right? We own it together. We do some things together. The thing about retail real estate is you're locked in to a certain mode of thinking, and there aren't a lot of, I love that Quan does this, right? Because not a lot of offices are teaching agents how to be and work with investors, but you certainly could go in, find a house that looks like to be a great deal. You call me and you say, I want to get an investment property. I look at it, I run the numbers, and I'm like, hey, I can make my numbers work giving you 20% of the rents in perpetuity. Would that work? Well, that would be really cool. Awesome. Let's do the deal. Right? It's super creative. Let's say you work for a spouse, right? And you've got $1 million in your IRA. Well, maybe you want to move that $1 million or some of it over to a self-directed instrument and vehicle. And you want to buy real estate in your self-directed IRA. Like, you can do that kind of stuff. Again, these are all subtopics that we could probably teach a whole class on, or a week of classes on, if you're interested in learning more about them. But this is pretty much the fundamentals there. Did that answer the question, Julianne?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know, well, we are getting a lot of calls. We get tons of calls on our properties that we owe very little on. What sources do you have to search for properties that have really high equity in their house?
So you can use ListSource, which is CoreLogic, same company that has our FMLS. Some of this stuff you can find in the tax report on the back end, the realist reports. You can find a lot of things in the realist reports. Typically, you can search by mortgage date. So even realist, like for free, you could go in and say, I want to search for people that have owned their house more than, I like to go back to the recession, more than, let's see, it's 2020, more than, let's say, 8 years. That puts me at 2012, right? They've owned it since 2012. So they've owned it up until 2012. And then, which means they have equity typically, unless they've done a refi. But you can also, I think in realist, search for the mortgage date. So if you have somebody that's owned a house at least 8 years or more, but their mortgage dates prior to the recession or 2012, that'll usually give you the people with equity. You're just, instead of paying CoreLogic for an amped up service to realist, just use realist to search and see what you can find. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is Remine. I haven't used Remine very much, but I think you can use Remine, which is free on FMLS members, to go in and search for some really interesting things as well.
And I want to go to Yvette's question that she asked at the beginning. What investors are typically looking for as far as a return?
Okay, that is a great question. And so it depends. You've got investors out there that'll spend $400,000 in East Cobb that will be willing to make $15,000, right? So as an investor, my goal is to always make 15% net profit. After I'm done, I want to make 15%. So $400,000 house, if I'm all in on that $400,000 house in East Cobb, I would like to make $60,000. That is very hard to do in a competitive environment like East Cobb. You'll have investors that'll make 30. You'll have investors that make 20. You'll have investors that make 5. Now they don't want to make 5. but and you've got a lot of newbie investors out there. So I would say if you're going to do it for yourself, you need to shoot between a 12 and 15% margin. That's what a builder would make, by the way. If you're going to build a brand new house, the builder's only going to make 12 to 15% margin. And that's what a real estate investor should seek to make. Okay. So running the numbers.
Is that for a flip? Is that 12 to 15% like for a flip, or can you clarify?
Per flip. Yes.
For a flip. Okay.
Yeah.
What about for a rental investment?
I mean, a rental, ideally that if you can make 12 to 15% as a flip, you have to work the numbers to see if they work as a rental property. But on a rental property, we'd have to run the numbers on various scenarios. Like in a $400,000 East Cobb house, I'm probably not going to keep that as well. 400 I might, but if it's a $550,000 ARV or market value house in East Cobb, I'm probably not going to rent that if it's a flip. But a $300,000 house in Sprayberry, I'm going to rent if I can get in the numbers right. It's just, at some point it becomes a math problem. So you've all heard of it. Maybe you've investigated real estate investing and you've heard of the 70% rule. So can I explain that real fast? The 70% rule assumes something. It assumes a 30% gross profit. The 70% rule goes like this. I'm going to pay 70% of the ARV, which is the market value. So on a $200,000 house, 70% of that's $140,000 minus the cost of repairs. That's the part that most people forget about. Minus the cost of repairs. So $140,000, but the house needs $40,000 worth of fix up. I'm going to buy that house at $100,000. Basically 50 cents on the dollar, right? Why? That 30% margin, that 70% rule, like you might say, well, Terry, you're making 30%. No, I'm not making 30%. Remember all those holding costs that we talked about earlier? That's all included in that 30% number, the 70% of ARV and real estate commissions, right? That'll take up 6%. So now my 70% margin is now down 6%. So I'm at 24. My holding costs and everything else, that's 6 or 7%. Now I'm down to 17%. And then I have the oops factor. What happens if the air conditioning goes out or whatever? Now I'm down to my 12 to 15% number. That's what a small investor wants to make. Now you might ask yourself this question. Well, Terry, if you did 12 flips, you'd make $500,000. Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. Now, we didn't talk about this little spreadsheet about borrowing private money and paying. How do you pay for this stuff? Like there's interest carry, and private investors are typically wanting 9 or 10% for their money right now because you compete with the stock market with people, right? So there's carrying costs outside of what we discussed, that further complicate the matter. But that's why the 70% rule is so powerful. Now, in East Cobb, most people are willing to go up to 72 to 75%, including us. We'll go to 75%. We just bought one in Dunwoody for $260,000, but the chimney's fallen off. House is probably worth $420,000. That sounds like a good deal, right? But when you start looking at their inspection report, and now this thing is going to mushroom to $120,000 to $140,000 renovation budget, it's not worth it anymore to us to make $30,000. I can go to Rome and buy a house for 40, put 40 in it, and make 40. So would it be better to go to Rome? For us, it is. Like if I can't get my 15%, I am not going to buy a house in Cobb County. Personally.
And
Open
would you
door.
say that a holder is looking more for a 10%?
Yeah, a holder can pay
12?
more. Absolutely. A holder definitely can pay more than a flipper. How much more? It just depends on what it would rent for, right? You have to do the math.
Yeah.
It's all a math problem. It's the same. You run the math the same way, but the numbers are always changing based on what's the ARV, what can you get for rent? Like Julianne gave me the information that I needed to run this math problem, but you have to run the math problem every single time.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense to y'all.
Yeah.
Terry, do you mind talking about timing right now with the pandemic and investing? What are your thoughts about buying when helping investors, or even ourselves for ourselves? Is it a good timing right now? Because I keep hearing that the stock market's just going to burst, and then that it's going to affect real estate, and starting in like next year, especially after the elections, that's when it's probably the best time to look for investment properties or invest. So could you share your thoughts on that as well?
My first sentence is listen to Gary Keller. Whatever he says trumps just about anything anybody else says. If you think about Gary Keller, right? He has access to the top, to everybody at the top, everybody, including the President of the United States, right? He has access to everybody. I will tell you I'm approaching it from caution. I think we're all elated and excited that this recession hasn't been as bad, or it hasn't even been the same. Like this housing market is a freight train that's not stopping. That just usually means the crash is really hard when it does stop. Here's where we're living, right? And I've run the stats. We've got 23% less sales typically during this, what I call the COVID period, than we had last year. And we have anywhere between 6 and 9%, depending on the week, more houses going under contract. That's a 32% inventory reduction versus last year. If you guys look at the COVID inventory, back when it started, we were like 3,600 houses in the 4 counties I track, which are Cobb, Bartow, Cherokee, and Paulding. I don't track Fulton because that's not where I invest typically. So 3,600 houses. 2 weeks ago, we were down to 3,200. So that's 600 houses disappearing off, or 400 houses disappearing off the market in just a matter of 6 weeks. It's continuing to go that way, which is why prices are up, way, way up. Like, I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but my buddy just listed a house in Seven Hills and got 20,000 over asking first day. Like, Atlanta has never seen this in the time I've been in real estate. I don't know about you, Juliana, but I have not seen this type of frenzy in my career, 20 years. So I will tell you, you've got to proceed with caution. It is a good time as long as you can find a good deal. What my worries are as an investor, I'm trying to flip them as fast as I can, unless I'm going to keep them as a buy and hold, because I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't like when I don't know what's going to happen. But I would say continue to listen to what Gary Keller is telling you and build up your savings. Enjoy the time while it's good, because it's not always good.
The numbers that we just got from the Georgia MLS, in the week of June 7th through the 13th, 3,123 listings under contract. And the current, but the number of new listings was down. Mm-hmm. So you're right, that it's going away. I mean, there's no inventory. None. And so another thing, here's what you can do though, right? So this is the angle we're playing. We're like, look, there are people stuck in their houses that don't want to move, but they do want to move, but they can't move, right? We're basically telling people, you want to close in 6 months? We'll write you an offer today and we'll close in 6 months. Well, that's fine. No problem. You know, I'm going to build in a 120-day due diligence period, I can promise you, so that, you know, in 4 months, if the market looks like it's tanking, I'm going to either bail on that contract or I'm going to renegotiate my price, right? But I'll close somebody in 6 months, 3 months, 4 months. That's where you can be an advantage when you're going on listing appointments, because you get a lot of these teaser calls probably, I'm assuming today, hey, we're thinking about selling, but with COVID, we're just not sure how things are going. And you could go in and say, oh, this house needs a lot of work, might be great for an investor. I know an investor who will let you live here for 3 months, right? Does that mean I'm going to close tomorrow and let them live there for 3 months? No, that's risky for me, isn't it? As an investor, it's risky for you as an investor. The game plan for investing is you take the risk out, give people what they want while also reducing your own risk. Because buying a house is risky. Owning a rental property is risky. That's why real estate agents make 3% and 6%, because there's no risk. It's the greatest return on investment for the amount of risk that you put in my opinion. There's no greater return than being a real estate agent who can go out and get business, because you don't have to buy an asset, sell an asset. You know, you're facilitating somebody else to do that. But if you are going to take risk, you have to have the reward match your risk. So what someone has asked, how long do you typically hold a property until you sell? If on my buy and holds, I mean, if I can cash flow them
I never want to sell them. Think about it, you guys. If you own 20 houses that cash flow at $500 a month,
Exactly.
that's $100,000 a year. What can you do in your life with $100,000 a year that you don't do anything with? Like, you don't have to work for it.
That's right. It's
Right?
retirement.
Same thing with your pipeline with Keller Williams. I mean, they give you the opportunity to profit share. I know profit share people that are, I mean, personally, I know people that make $10,000 a month in profit share. By the way, it's a risk-free asset too. There's no risk in talking to somebody about coming over to Keller Williams and being a facilitator of that. You don't have to own anything, and you've got it. Now, is there equity in that? Yeah, there's whatever the cash flow is. That's what it's worth, right? So that person worked for 10 years to build his downline, $10,000 a month. It can go up and down, whatever happens. But we're talking about real estate investments right now. 20 of those. I really just want 30 houses that cash flow $500 a month. That's my quest.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Because I don't want to own 100. I have friends of mine they're like, I want to cash flow $150 a door. Well, then they got to own 100 of those. That's 100 roofs, 100 this. I just want 30 that I can, if my wife and I want to go in an RV and travel full time, that we'll be able to do that. Now I'm 52. A lot of you guys are younger than me. You should start now.
Mm-hmm.
Get 1 or 2 a year. By the time you get to 10, I mean, think about owning 30 properties, right? At that formula that we talked about. Like, remember Buy and Hold Bob? He had $63,000. Like, if you own them for 10, 15 years, most of these properties are going to have $65,000 in equity. 65,000 times 30 houses, you've got $2 million of equity. So now you're a multimillionaire, and you're collecting $100,000 a year in cash flow after repairs and management fees and all that stuff.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I think, I don't know, Julianne, I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like nobody was talking about this. New agents seem to have more interest in investing than I did when I got in the business in 2000.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of people out there that are being those one-off investors. Hey, I got a little bit of cash, I want to invest, because they hear about other people doing it and doing it well on HGTV or wherever. So you've got people that don't know what they're talking about saying, hey, I want to be an investor. And new agents run into them a lot. I think, and a lot of investors prey on new agents, running them ragged, trying to find a property because they can't find them themselves.
Yeah. They're typically not on the MLS. When I teach this class live, I tell people, if you sell 20 houses a year, you're going to stumble across one really great deal. So about for every 20 houses a year you sell, you'll get a call on one really great deal. That deal is the one that you should be buying. Okay. Now, if you can't buy it, that's when you partner with people. Like, you get together with people and partner. I own rental properties with 4 different people right now. I have some that I own myself, and I have some that I work with because I needed something at the time. One guy, I needed his credit. He had a W-2 job. I had the down payment, but I didn't have the credit at the time. I went through a foreclosure about 10 years ago. So for 3 years, I mean, for 7 years, I couldn't get a loan in my name. So what did I do? I leveraged other people. I brought them a great deal, and I said, hey, if you have the down payment and you don't mind getting the loan, let's split this 50-50 or whatever works, right? Again, it's always a negotiation on what works the best for somebody. But if you guys bring me a deal and you say, hey, is there any way we can look at this and I can be part of this? Absolutely. I'm always looking to help agents win because I want you guys. Look, if Yvette sells 60 houses a year, she doesn't have time to be a flipper. She doesn't. She doesn't even have time to be a buy and hold investor necessarily. She can buy houses and she could place them with a management company and never have to think about them if she didn't want to, right? She still can own real estate and still be an unbelievable real estate agent. Like, because I never want to tell people, if you love being a realtor, partner with investors so that you can win bigger.
Right.
And still sell 60 houses a year because you love doing it, and you should continue to do that because you're making a ton of money doing it that way. And then you call the guy that you partner with, your investor buddy. When you find a deal, you're bringing incredible value to him and to you, and he takes care of it. Like, I've had deals where people came to me and they brought it to me, and I did everything. I brought the money. I brought the renovation crew. We did everything. And then at the very end, we said, okay, what do you want out of this deal? What do I want out of it? And we just work out a win-win situation.
Awesome. So Terry, I was thinking, I was writing down some notes while you were going, and I'm thinking we should probably put a class on the books about how to find money for investment, for
Yes,
investments.
I'd love to teach that.
And I think that would have some real value. So if you don't have any other questions, folks, we are about an hour in. I know we started a little bit late, so thank you for your patience while we got our technology set up. And Rosina said amazing, so thank you so much. Remember that at 1 o'clock we have how to read settlement statements. So when you've got a closing, you need to know how to read them. So jump on at 1 o'clock. Terry, thank you so much.
Oh, you
for
guys
your
are awesome. Thank you.
expertise. We really appreciate it, and the way that you pour back into our agents at the office.
Anytime. Appreciate you
Thank
guys.
you, Terry.
Go crush it.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
Thank you, Terry.
Bye-bye. You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.